The preview was visible for exactly 3 seconds before the screen dimmed. 3 seconds that rewrote 5 years of my life. I can still taste you. Don't tell the warehouse worker you're tired tonight. The air left my lungs. Not a gasp, but a silent evacuation of oxygen. I stood there in my damp socks, staring at words that confirmed what I'd known since 3:14 this morning, but hadn't wanted to believe. The warehouse worker. Not your husband, not even Peter, just the warehouse worker. A dismissive little phrase that reduced me to my job title, my social class, my worthlessness in their shared joke. The notification light pulsed against the ceiling, a soft, rhythmic blue that cut through the darkness of our Seattle bedroom. 3:14 in the morning. Most men would have rolled over, blamed insomnia, and gone back to sleep. But I couldn't ignore the pattern. This was the 3rd night in a row. I lay perfectly still, my body a rigid line beneath the sheets, listening to the rain hammer against the window. Sylvia stirred beside me, her breathing steady, undisturbed. Then her phone buzzed again, a gentle vibration against the nightstand that seemed to echo through my chest. That's when I saw it. The smile. Even in sleep, her lips curved upward at the sound, a small, private expression of pleasure that I hadn't seen directed at me in months, maybe years. My wife was smiling in her sleep at a text message at 3 in the morning, and somehow I already knew it wasn't from her mother. I should have grabbed the phone, checked it, confronted her right there. That's what they do in movies, the dramatic revelation, the shouting match, the thrown objects. But something cold settled in my chest instead, a kind of arctic clarity that froze the rage before it could ignite. The rain intensified, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between buzzes. 15, 20, 30, then another pulse of blue light. Sylvia shifted, rolling toward me slightly. For a moment I thought she might wake up, might see me watching, but she just sighed, a sound of contentment, and pulled the duvet closer to her chin. I realized then that some betrayals don't deserve the dignity of a confrontation. Some lies are so complete, so carefully constructed, that tearing them down would only give the liar a chance to rebuild with better materials. I turned my head slowly, studying her face in the dim light. She looked peaceful, happy even, and I understood with brutal certainty that this happiness had nothing to do with me. I was the stage crew in the theater of her life, invisible, functional, necessary only to keep the show running while the real performance happened elsewhere. The blue light pulsed again. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't wake her. I simply made a decision in that dark, rain-soaked bedroom. If she wanted me gone, if I had become nothing more than a background character in my own marriage, then I would give her exactly what she wanted. I would disappear. Not with drama, not with explanations or accusations or the satisfying slam of a door. I would vanish so completely, so silently, that she'd never see it coming. The blue light pulsed one more time, and I smiled in the darkness. Let her have her secrets. I was about to become one. 4:15 in the morning. My Ford F-150 sat idling in the driveway, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn drizzle like accusatory fingers. I didn't want to go inside. That realization hit me harder than the physical exhaustion that made my bones ache. 3 years of graveyard shifts at the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Kent had turned my body into something mechanical. Wind it up, watch it work, let it collapse when the batteries ran out. I was a floor supervisor, managing 40 people and millions of dollars in inventory. But my hands still smelled like cardboard and hydraulic fluid, and my back still screamed from lifting crates my team was too slow to move. I killed the engine and listened to the metal tick as it cooled. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see our townhouse in Queen Anne, sleek, modern, expensive. Sylvia's dream, my mortgage nightmare. The house seemed to mock me with its floor-to-ceiling windows and architect-designed angles. We'd bought it 2 years ago, right after her first big commission at the luxury dealership. She'd been so proud, parading me through open houses in neighborhoods where my truck looked like a stain on the pristine driveways. "Think bigger, Peter," she'd said, squeezing my arm while talking to the real estate agent. "We're not warehouse people anymore." Warehouse people. The phrase echoed now, taking on new meaning after that text message. "Don't tell the warehouse worker you're tired tonight." I sat in my truck for another 10 minutes, watching the rain. A part of me wanted to reverse out of the driveway and just keep driving, but I was too tired, too well trained in the routine of my own diminishment. So I grabbed my lunchbox, stepped out into the cold Seattle drizzle, and walked to the front door like a ghost returning to haunt his own life. The house was exactly as I'd left it 12 hours ago. Immaculate, sterile, smelling of lavender and expensive cleaning products. Sylvia insisted on a cleaning service twice a week, even though I'd offered to do it myself to save money. "I'm not living in a warehouse, Peter," she'd said, not looking up from her phone. I toed off my boots on the rubber mat she designated for work shoes, careful not to let them touch the hardwood floor. I moved through the darkness in my socks, a practiced ghost in my own home, heading toward the bedroom where my wife slept peacefully, her phone still glowing softly on the nightstand. I stood in the doorway, watching her. The king-size bed seemed enormous, a vast territory where we occupied separate countries. She kicked off the duvet, and even in sleep she looked high maintenance, silk eye mask pushed up on her forehead, expensive night cream glistening on her skin. I had 4 hours before I'd have to get up and fix the gutter she'd been nagging me about. 4 hours to sleep next to a stranger who smiled at someone else's messages. I was so tired I could barely think, but not tired enough to miss what happened next. I moved to my side of the bed, ready to collapse into those precious 4 hours of sleep. My hand was reaching for the lamp switch when the room pulsed blue again. Sylvia's phone lit up the darkness like a flare. The buzz was louder than I'd ever noticed, an angry insect sound that seemed to vibrate through the wooden nightstand, through the floor, through my chest. I froze, my hand suspended in midair. I wasn't a snooper, never had been. I believed in privacy and trust, mostly because I was too exhausted for drama. But the phone sat there, just inches from her sleeping face, the screen glowing with its secret. I looked down. The preview was visible for exactly 3 seconds before the screen dimmed. 3 seconds that rewrote 5 years of my life. Sender, Derek. Client. "I can still taste you. Don't tell the warehouse worker you're tired tonight." The air left my lungs, not a gasp, but a silent evacuation of oxygen. I stood there in my damp socks, staring at words that confirmed what I'd known since 3:14 this morning, but hadn't wanted to believe. The warehouse worker. Not your husband, not even Peter, just the warehouse worker. A dismissive little phrase that reduced me to my job title, my social class, my worthlessness in their shared joke. I didn't scream. I didn't reach out and shake her awake. I didn't grab the phone and smash it against the wall. The rage should have been nuclear. Instead, something colder settled in my chest, a spreading frost that crystallized every doubt I'd pushed aside for months. The late meetings that ran past midnight, the new lingerie I never saw her wear, the way she'd started showering immediately after coming home, before even saying hello, the credit card statements she'd hidden in the junk drawer, the way she'd stopped saying my name, referring to me only as he or him when talking to her friends on the phone. I looked at Sylvia, really looked at her. Her lips held that same slight smirk, a subconscious reaction to the vibration even in sleep. She was happy, and she held me in such low regard that she didn't even bother to hide her phone, didn't even turn it face down on the nightstand. Why would she? The warehouse worker wouldn't dare look. The warehouse worker knew his place. I managed a team of 40 people. I coordinated logistics for millions of dollars of inventory. I had a degree in supply chain management that I'd earned while working full-time. But to her, to this Derek, I was just the grunt who paid the bills so she could play pretend with men who wore Italian suits. "Warehouse worker," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. I backed out of the room slowly, carefully, my footsteps silent on the carpet. I walked down the hallway, through the living room with its uncomfortable designer furniture, and into the kitchen with its marble island, another thing she'd insisted we needed. I sat on a bar stool and stared at my calloused hands under the dim light of the range hood. They were honest hands, working hands, hands that had built a life for someone who was ashamed of them. The anger should have been hot and blinding. Instead, I felt that Arctic clarity spreading through my veins, freezing everything it touched. I wasn't going to fight for her. You don't fight for someone who looks at you and sees nothing. I pulled out my phone, screen cracked in the corner, 3 years old, and opened my email. My fingers moved with strange certainty as I typed a search query I'd never considered before. Internal transfer opportunities. Out of state. "Okay," I said to the empty kitchen. "Okay." The kitchen filled with gray morning light, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows Sylvia had demanded during the remodel. I stood by the coffee maker, watching it drip dark liquid into the pot, each drop marking another second of the performance I was about to give. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the last 3 hours sitting in the dark living room staring at the rain, waiting for the sun to rise so I could play my part. The role of the oblivious husband, one last time. At 7 o'clock sharp, I heard the click of the bedroom door. Sylvia emerged already halfway transformed into her dealership persona. Silk robe tied tightly at her waist, hair wrapped in a towel, face bare but soon to be painted into perfection. She didn't look at me. She went straight to the counter where her phone lay charging. She'd moved it from the nightstand the moment she woke up. Interesting. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice rusty but steady. "No, I'm doing a juice cleanse." She tapped furiously on her screen, a small smile playing at her lips. "Derek, Mr. Vance, the client I told you about, mentioned his trainer swears by it." Derek. She said his name so casually, like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. "You look terrible, Peter," she said, finally glancing up. "Did you even sleep?" "Rough shift," I lied, watching her hands. She kept the phone screen tilted away from me, her thumb hovering over the lock button, always protecting her secrets. "You always have a rough shift," she sighed, opening the fridge and pulling out a bottle of green sludge. "It's embarrassing, honestly. We have dinner with the regional manager next week, and I need you to not look like you've been hauling boxes all night. Wear the suit I bought you, and please scrub your hands. Those oil stains are impossible." The warehouse worker. The phrase echoed in my mind, overlaying every complaint, every disgusted glance at my hands, every disappointed sigh. I took a sip of black coffee, testing the waters. "I might have to work late tonight. Inventory audit." Sylvia didn't even blink. "That's fine. I have a late showing anyway, a Porsche 911 GT3. Her hand paused on the juice bottle cap, just for a fraction of a second. "It's going to take hours to close the deal with Mr. Vance." "Mr. Vance," I repeated softly. "Does he buy a lot of cars?" "Why the 20 questions?" Her tone sharpened, defensive. "Just making conversation," I said, pouring more coffee I wouldn't drink. She finished her juice and disappeared into the bathroom to complete her transformation. 20 minutes later, she emerged, sharp navy blazer, pencil skirt, looking like $1 million. She smelled of Santal 33, a perfume that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She grabbed her keys and designer bag, already moving toward the door when she remembered the obligatory goodbye. She turned, offering her cheek, a gesture of charity, not affection. I leaned in and pressed my lips against her skin, lingering just a second longer than usual. I breathed in her expensive scent, feeling the coldness of her foundation. "Have a good day," I whispered. "Mm-hmm," she hummed, turning away. I watched closely. I saw her hand come up to her face with a quick, almost unconscious motion. Sylvia wiped the spot where I'd kissed her. She checked her fingers as if expecting to find grease or dirt transferred from my lips to her pristine skin. Finding nothing, she rubbed her cheek anyway, ensuring every trace of me was gone. The front door clicked shut.
the lock engaged. I stood alone in the kitchen, the anger dissolving into something harder, clearer. The wipe was a reflex, honest, unconscious. She didn't just cheat on me, she was repulsed by me. I walked to the calendar on the fridge, picked up a red marker, and drew a circle around today's date. Then I picked up my car keys. I wasn't going to work. I had to see it for myself.
I didn't go to work. I called in sick for the first time in 4 years, my voice steady as I lied to the shift manager about food poisoning. Then I drove my truck into the city, parking 3 blocks from the glass-fronted dealership where Sylvia worked. The rain had turned into relentless gray mist that blurred the edges of skyscrapers and made the whole city look like it was dissolving. Inside the cab of my F-150, the air was stale, smelling of old coffee and anxiety. I sat low in the seat, eyes fixed on the dealership's exit, watching luxury sedans glide out like sharks into traffic. At 12:15, Sylvia's white Mercedes C-Class pulled out. She wasn't heading toward the test drive route. She turned left, toward downtown and the waterfront. I followed, keeping 2 cars between us, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a cheap movie, but the nausea churning in my stomach was very real. She drove to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. I watched from across the street as she stepped out, handing her keys to the valet with a smile I hadn't seen in years. Bright, engaging, flirtatious, the smile she used to give me before I became the warehouse worker. I had to park in a public garage a block away and jog back through the rain, pulling my hood up to obscure my face. Inside the hotel lobby, I found cover behind a large decorative fern near the entrance to the restaurant, the Georgian. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, hushed conversations, a world away from screeching conveyor belts and fluorescent lights. Sylvia sat at a corner table. She wasn't alone. Derek looked exactly as I'd imagined, mid-40s, charcoal suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack. He had the soft, manicured look of a man who made money moving information, not boxes. Through the gap in the foliage, I watched the waiter pour wine. I watched Sylvia lean in, elbows on the table, posture open and eager. She was laughing, not the polite, dismissive chuckle she gave me when I told jokes. This was genuine, full-throated, making her throw her head back slightly. Then came the touch. Derek reached across the table and took her hand. Sylvia didn't pull away. She didn't wipe it afterward. Instead, she turned her palm upward, interlacing her fingers with his, looking at him with an expression that cut deeper than any insult. Admiration. She looked at Derek like he was a prize she'd won, a reflection of the woman she believed she deserved to be. They weren't just sleeping together. She was auditioning for a new life. I watched for 10 minutes. I saw Derek slide a small velvet box across the table, earrings perhaps, or a bracelet. Sylvia's face lit up with greed and joy that was terrifyingly pure. She let him brush a stray hair from her forehead, her eyes fluttering shut at his touch. My phone vibrated. A text from my sister asking if Sylvia and I were coming to Sunday barbecue. I couldn't answer, couldn't take my eyes off them. The disparity was absolute. In that restaurant, Sylvia was elegant, cherished, happy. With me, she was a prisoner of her own disappointment. I'd seen enough. I didn't storm in, didn't flip the table. I simply turned around, my wet boots squeaking softly on polished marble, and walked back out into the rain. The image of their interlaced fingers burned into my retinas, fueling the cold, quiet engine that had started turning in my chest. The war had begun. The rain hammered against the metal roof of the F-150, a deafening drum roll that isolated me from the rest of the city. I sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, heater blasting hot air against my cold face. The windshield fogged up, turning the world outside into a gray, shapeless smear. For 20 minutes I stared at the steering wheel, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from rage so dense it felt like it might snap my ribs. I played the scenario out in my head, the confrontation.
I could drive home, wait for her, and when she walked in smelling of wine and another man, I could throw everything in her face. I could scream. I could demand to know why 5 years of marriage, of paying her debts, of fixing her car, of holding her when she was sick meant less than a lunch date with a man in Italian loafers. But I knew Sylvia. I knew her better than she knew herself. If I screamed, she would cry, not from guilt, but from fear for her reputation. Then the tears would stop, and the defense would begin. She'd twist it. She'd say I was distant, that I worked too much, that I didn't understand her ambition. She'd make my anger the problem, not her betrayal. She'd look at me with that pitying expression that said, "See, this is why I have to look elsewhere. You're unstable." A confrontation would be a gift. It would be a dramatic scene in the movie of her life where she was the tragic protagonist, stuck with a blue-collar anchor. It would give her a story to tell at brunch. Peter just went crazy. I had to leave for my own safety. I wiped condensation off the side window. The world outside was cold and indifferent. I realized then that I didn't want to win the argument. I wanted to win the war. And the only way to win against a narcissist was to deny them an audience. I reached into the center console and pulled out a notepad I used for work schedules. I uncapped a pen. My hand was steady now, guided by the same precision I used to manage logistics. Step 1, finances. Step 2, transfer. Step 3, asset liquidation. Step 4, departure. It was a logistics problem, that's all. My marriage wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a failed project that needed to be decommissioned. And I was good at logistics. I moved millions of units of inventory across the country with zero error margin. I could move one man out of a house in Queen Anne. I looked at the notepad. The ink bled slightly into the cheap paper, but the words were clear. "No audience," I said aloud. The sound of my own voice was calm, terrifyingly so. I wouldn't ask for a divorce. I wouldn't argue over who kept the espresso machine. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt, of watching me beg or rage or fall apart. I would simply cease to be. One day she would come home, and the space I occupied would just be empty. No note begging for answers, no dramatic confrontation, no closure, just absence. She wanted me to be invisible. I'd give her exactly that. I'd become so invisible I'd disappear completely, and she'd spend the rest of her life wondering how the warehouse worker outsmarted her. I put the truck in gear and pulled out into traffic. The image of Sylvia holding Derek's hand faded, replaced by the mental checklist of a man preparing to execute the most precise operation of his life. The husband was dead. The ghost was born. And ghosts don't make noise when they leave.
The next 5 days were a masterclass in deception. I moved through my life like a sleeper agent, my exterior presenting the same tired, submissive husband Sylvia expected, while my mind worked with the precision of a military operation. Wednesday morning, I sat in the glass-walled office of Sarah Jenkins, the HR director at the distribution center. Outside, forklifts beeped and conveyor belts roared, a symphony of industrial chaos that usually gave me headaches. Today, it sounded like freedom. "Houston?" Sarah asked, adjusting her glasses as she looked at my file on her screen. "That's a lateral move, Peter. Maybe even a step down, depending on the shift. You're on track for regional management here in Seattle." "I need a change of scenery," I said, my voice flat, offering no room for negotiation. "Personal reasons. I need to be gone by Monday." Sarah studied me for a long moment. In the corporate world, personal reasons usually meant divorce, addiction, or burnout. She didn't press. "They have a graveyard supervisor slot opening at the North Houston UB. It's yours if you want it, but the relocation package is minimal." "I don't need a package. I just need the paperwork." I leaned forward. "And Sarah, I need this kept confidential until I clock out on my last shift." "Understood." By Wednesday afternoon, I'd secured a one-bedroom apartment in Katy, Texas. I rented it sight unseen, using a new email address Sylvia didn't know existed. It was a sterile complex with beige carpets and a communal pool, a far cry from the Architectural Digest townhouse I was currently paying for. But it had one feature that mattered. Sylvia wasn't in it.
The hardest part was the evenings. I'd come home at 6, my body aching from the phantom weight of the secrets I carried. Sylvia would be on the couch, scrolling through Instagram or texting. "The dishwasher is making that noise again," she said Thursday night, not looking up from her phone. "I'll take a look at it," I said. I walked into the kitchen, got my toolbox, and lay on the floor. I wasn't fixing the dishwasher. I was tightening a screw that wasn't loose, buying time. From my vantage point on the floor, I could see her ankles crossed on the ottoman. I listened to a record a voice message for Derek. "I can't wait for the weekend. It's been so draining here." I smiled grimly at the underside of the counter. She had no idea just how draining it was about to get. Friday, during my lunch break, I walked into a Wells Fargo branch, a bank different from the one we shared. I opened a personal checking account and set up a scheduled transfer for Tuesday morning, the day after I'd be gone. Exactly 50% of our savings, not a penny more, not a penny less. I wasn't a thief. I was settling accounts. I left the house deed, the car title for her Mercedes, and the credit card bills in a neat stack in my home office drawer. I wasn't taking any debt associated with her lifestyle. The house was in both names, but she couldn't afford the mortgage alone. That was her calculation to solve now. Saturday night was the final test. Sylvia was in a good mood. She'd sold the Porsche. She actually poured me a glass of wine. "You've been quiet this week," she observed, swirling the red liquid in her glass. "It's nice, less complaining." "Just tired," I said, focusing on work. "Well, keep it up," she patted my hand patronizingly. "It suits you." She went to bed early. I stayed up, walking through the dark house, touching the furniture, the walls, the expensive decor she'd bought to impress people she didn't like. I felt absolutely no attachment to any of it. Everything was ready. The flight was booked for Monday morning. The logistics were sound. The cargo, myself, was ready for transport.
Monday morning arrived with the same gray persistence that defined my entire existence in Seattle. The alarm went off at 6:30. I turned it off before the second beep, lying still for a moment, listening to Sylvia's breathing. Steady, untroubled. She was dreaming of quotas or commissions, or perhaps the weekend she'd spent working while I sat at home staring at walls. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. Not sadness, not anger, but a profound lightness, the feeling of a tether snapping. I got up and went through the motions one last time. Coffee, shower, getting dressed. I put on my work boots, though I'd never set foot in the distribution center again. Sylvia came into the kitchen at 7:15, rushing as usual. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that cost more than my first car. "I'm going to be late," she announced, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. She didn't look at me, just checked her email on her phone. "The cleaning lady is coming today, right? Make sure the alarm is off before you leave." "I will," I said. She paused at the door, hand on the knob. For a second, I thought she might sense it, the shift in atmospheric pressure, the void opening behind me. But she just tapped her heel impatiently. "Oh, and Peter, we need to talk about the summer vacation budget tonight. Try to be home by 6. "I won't be late," I said. It wasn't a lie. I simply wouldn't be there. "Okay, bye." The door slammed. The sound echoed through the high-ceilinged hallway, fading into silence that felt absolute. I waited 2 minutes. Then I moved. I didn't trash the house, didn't cut up her clothes. I walked into the bedroom and opened my side of the closet. I'd hidden the duffel bag behind the workbench in the garage. I brought it upstairs now. I packed efficiently. 7 shirts, 3 pairs of jeans, my laptop, the framed photo of my mother from my bedside table, passport, birth certificate. That was it. I left the suit she'd bought me, left the watch she gave me for our anniversary, purchased with credit card points she'd accumulated buying things for herself. I zipped the bag shut, frighteningly light. 5 years of marriage distilled into 20 pounds of luggage. I walked to the kitchen. On the pristine marble island where morning light was just beginning to hit it, I placed an envelope. Inside were divorce papers, signed and notarized. I'd done it during my lunch break Friday. I hadn't asked for alimony, hadn't asked for the house, just checked the box for irreconcilable differences. Next to the envelope, I placed my house key. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding band. Simple tungsten, scratched from years of manual labor. I placed it on top of the envelope. The metal made a sharp clink against marble. I looked around the kitchen one last time, memorizing the way light hit the refrigerator, the hum of appliances, the smell of the expensive candle Sylvia had burned last night. I wanted to remember it, not with nostalgia, but as a reference point for everything I was escaping. I picked up my bag, walked to the front door, disarmed the security system, and stepped onto the porch. The rain had stopped. The air was cool and damp. I locked the door from the inside handle and pulled it shut. The click of the latch was final. I didn't look back at the windows, didn't check the mailbox. I walked down the driveway to where the Uber was waiting. As I settled into the back seat, I took out my phone, popped the SIM card tray open with a paperclip, and snapped the small chip in half. I rolled down the window and dropped the pieces onto wet asphalt as we merged onto the freeway. "Heading out for business or pleasure?" the driver asked. I watched the Seattle skyline receding behind me, a gray smear against clouds. "Neither," I said, closing my eyes. "I'm just moving on."
The house was dark when Sylvia pulled into the driveway at 7:45. She frowned, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel of the Mercedes. Peter was always home by 6, always. The porch light should have been on. The kitchen should have been glowing with dinner preparation. The recycling bin should have been dragged to the curb. Instead, the windows were black, staring back at her like hollow eyes. "Unbelievable," she muttered, grabbing her purse. "One job. He has one job." She unlocked the front door, pushing it open with her hip. The air inside was stale, lacking the usual scent of cooking or cleaning products. It was just empty. The silence was heavy, pressing against her eardrums the moment she stepped onto the hardwood floor. "Peter?" she called out, her voice sharp, ready to scold. "I hope you're not sick. We have to discuss the budget." No answer. No heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. No apologetic murmur from the living room. Sylvia kicked off her heels, annoyance flaring into anger. She walked into the kitchen, reaching for the light switch. The recessed LEDs flooded the room with harsh white light. That's when she saw it. The kitchen island was bare, cleared of the mail and magazines that usually cluttered it. In the center sat a single white envelope, a house key, and a ring. Sylvia stopped. She stared at the objects, her brain refusing to process the pattern. It looked like a still life painting, staged, deliberate. She walked over slowly, the silence of the house suddenly feeling less like an absence and more like a presence. She picked up the ring first, Peter's wedding band, cold, heavy, scratched. She held it up to the light, a strange tightness gripping her throat. He never took this off. He said his hands felt naked without it. She dropped the ring back on the marble. It made a sharp clattering sound that made her flinch. She ripped open the envelope. It wasn't a handwritten note. It wasn't a tear-stained note begging for forgiveness or accusing her of infidelity. It was a legal document. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her eyes scanned the page, skipping over legal jargon until they landed on the signature at the bottom. Peter J. Penn. Dated 3 days ago. "What is this?" she whispered. "Is this a joke?" She grabbed her phone and dialed his number, pressing it to her ear, ready to scream at him for this childish stunt. "The subscriber you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again." She pulled the phone away, staring at the screen. Not in service? That wasn't possible. She paid the bill. It was a family plan. Panic began to prick at her skin, cold and sharp. She opened her banking app. The joint account balance stared back at her, exactly half of what it had been that morning. The transaction history showed a wire transfer labeled Settlement Withdrawal, processed at 9 a.m. He hadn't just left. He had executed an exit. Sylvia looked around the kitchen. The emptiness suddenly felt aggressive. The absence of his boots by the door, his jacket on the hook. It wasn't that he was late. He was erased.
"You coward," she hissed, slamming her phone down on the counter. "You pathetic, passive-aggressive coward." She waited for tears, but they didn't come. Instead, a wave of humiliation washed over her. How dare he? How dare the warehouse worker leave her? She was the prize. She was the one who brought class to this marriage. He was lucky to be in this house. She couldn't be the woman whose husband walked out. That was a story for losers, for women who let themselves go. She needed to get ahead of this. She needed a narrative. Her hands shaking with rage, she picked up her phone again. She didn't call the police. She didn't call his sister. She called Derek. "Sylvia?" Derek's voice was smooth, distracted. "I'm at a dinner. Everything okay?" "No," Sylvia said, forcing a wobble into her voice, crafting victimhood on the fly. "It's Peter. He's gone crazy, Derek. I came home and he cleared out the account. He left me. I think he's having a breakdown." She paused, looking at the divorce papers. "I'm all alone here," she whispered, leaning into the role. "I don't know what to do." She didn't mention the ring. She didn't mention the silence. And as she hung up and the silence rushed back in, Sylvia felt a cold draft on her neck. For the first time in 5 years, she was the only person in the room, and the house felt terrifyingly large.
5 years later, Houston, Texas. The heat in Houston was different from the damp chill of the Pacific Northwest. It was aggressive, a physical weight that pressed against the glass of the 34th floor conference room. Peter stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling, sun-baked skyline. 5 years. In that time, Peter Penn had ceased to be the man who scraped grease off his knuckles with pumice soap. The man reflected in the glass was leaner, harder. His shoulders, once slumped from the burden of physical labor and emotional neglect, were now held back with the easy confidence of a man who knew his worth. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, custom-fitted, not off the rack, and a watch that cost more than the Honda Civic he'd driven during his first year in Texas. He was no longer a shift supervisor. He was a senior logistics consultant for Vantage Supply Chain Solutions. He fixed broken systems. He walked into failing companies, identified the rot, and cut it out with surgical precision. "Peter," he turned. Harrison, the senior partner, sat at the head of the mahogany table, tapping a thick file folder. "You're miles away," Harrison said. "Just admiring the view," Peter replied. His voice was deeper now, lacking the apologetic cadence he used to have. "What's the assignment?" Harrison slid the file across the polished wood. "It's a merger, mid-sized retail chain being acquired by a national conglomerate. Their distribution network is a nightmare. Redundancies, theft, inefficient routing. They need someone to go in, audit the personnel, and restructure the entire operation." Peter picked up the file and flipped it open. The data was familiar. Inventory turn rates, shrinkage percentages, labor costs. Then his eyes drifted to the location field. Region, Pacific Northwest. HQ, Seattle, WA. Peter's hand didn't shake. His heartbeat didn't skip. He simply stared at the word Seattle. It looked innocuous on the page, just a collection of letters. "Is that a problem?" Harrison asked, watching him closely. "I know you transferred down here from that area originally. If it's too close to home." Peter looked up. He thought about the rain. He thought about the townhouse in Queen Anne. He thought about the silence of that last morning. For the first 2 years in Houston, he'd checked his old email account, waiting for something, a subpoena, a rage-filled message, anything. He never saw one. Eventually, he stopped checking. He'd buried that life under degrees, certifications, and 70-hour work weeks. He realized with sudden, cool satisfaction that he didn't feel fear. He felt indifference. Seattle wasn't a graveyard anymore. It was just another coordinate on a map. "It's not a problem," Peter said, closing the file. "I know the geography. It'll make the routing optimization faster." "Good," Harrison nodded. "Because the client is difficult. They've got a lot of dead weight in their management tier, people who think they're untouchable. You're going to have to fire a lot of people, Peter." Peter smiled. It wasn't cruel, but it lacked warmth.
It was the smile of a man who understood that keeping dead weight only sank the ship. "I'm good at making people disappear," Peter said. "I know you are. That's why you're the best we have." Harrison stood up. "You fly out Monday, first class, put everything on the corporate card. And Peter, take a coat. It's raining up there." Peter walked out of the office, the file tucked under his arm. He walked past assistants who nodded respectfully, past junior consultants who wanted his mentorship. He stepped out into the humid Houston afternoon and loosened his tie slightly. He was going back, but he wasn't going back as the husband who slept on the floor to avoid a fight. He was returning as the auditor. And if fate had a sense of humor, he might just run into the ghosts of his past. He checked his phone. No messages, no drama. Just a calendar notification for his flight to SeaTac. "Let it rain," Peter whispered to himself, unlocking his car. The war had ended 5 years ago. But victory, real victory, was about to begin.
The fluorescent lights of the department store were unforgiving. Unlike the warm recessed lighting of the luxury car dealership where Sylvia used to reign, these lights buzzed with a low-frequency hum that seemed to highlight every fine line around her eyes, every crack in her foundation. "Would you like to try the new Eternity sample?" Sylvia asked, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The woman walking past, a 20-something in yoga pants and a messy bun, didn't even break stride. She just waved a hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. Sylvia's hand tightened around the perfume bottle. 5 years ago, men in $3,000 suits waited patiently for her to acknowledge them. They brought her coffee. They laughed at her jokes. Now she was the invisible woman behind the counter at La Parfumerie, standing on swollen feet for 8 hours a day, praying for a commission that would barely cover her rent. Her downfall hadn't been a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing slide. It started 6 months after Peter vanished. Without his income, the mortgage on the Queen Anne townhouse became a suffocating weight. She'd expected Derek to step in, to save her. That was the script. But Derek didn't want a rescue mission. He wanted a diversion. When the drama of divorce papers and foreclosure notices started to encroach on their fun, Derek's texts became shorter. Then came the lunch where he didn't hold her hand. He told her he was reassessing his priorities. 2 weeks later, she saw him on social media in Cabo with a 24-year-old fitness instructor. He'd traded her in like a leased car with too many miles. The stress ruined her sales performance. She became snappy with clients, desperate to close deals to pay bills. The dealership fired her less than a year later, citing misalignment with company values. Now, Sylvia lived in a cramped studio apartment in a darker part of the city. Her closet, once filled with designer labels, was now a mix of carefully preserved relics and fast fashion. "Sylvia, you're zoning out," the floor manager, a woman 10 years younger named Chloe, snapped as she walked by. "Fix the display. The lipsticks are crooked." "I was just about to," Sylvia replied, her voice tight. She crouched down to arrange the tubes of lipstick, her knees popping. She hated Chloe. She hated the customers. But mostly, she hated Peter. In her mind, this was all his fault. He was the villain. If he hadn't abandoned her, if he had just fought for her or yelled or done something, she wouldn't be here. He pulled the rug out from under her life with such cowardice that he didn't even give her the chance to explain. She stood up, catching her reflection in the mirrored display. She was still beautiful, she told herself. Her hair was dyed a fierce blonde, her makeup applied with professional precision. But there was a hardness in her face now, a brittleness. She looked like someone constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. A notification popped up on her phone, hidden under the register. Rent due in 3 days. She felt a wave of nausea. She needed a sale. She needed a big sale. A well-dressed couple walked toward the counter. The man looked successful, the woman distracted. Sylvia smoothed her uniform, black pants, black shirt, the generic uniform of the service class, and put on her mask. "Good afternoon,"
Sylvia purred, channeling the ghost of the woman who used to sell Porsches. "Are we looking for a gift or perhaps a treat for yourself?" The woman looked at Sylvia, her eyes lingering on the name tag, then her face. There was a flicker of recognition. No, just pity. "Just looking," the woman said, turning her back. Sylvia's hand tightened around the perfume bottle. The smile froze on her face like a rictus. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them that she used to drive a Mercedes, that she had a husband who worshipped the ground she walked on until he lost his mind. But she said nothing. She just stood there, a queen in exile, ruling over a kingdom of glass bottles and scented water, while the rain outside washed away the city she thought she owned.
The meeting with the acquisition team had run late, leaving Peter with only 40 minutes before his dinner reservation with the client's CEO. He walked through the downtown shopping district, the collar of his trench coat turned up against the drizzle. He checked his phone. A reminder flashed: Sarah's birthday. He'd forgotten. His sister, the only one who'd stood by him during the divorce, was turning 40 next week. He couldn't show up empty-handed, and he certainly couldn't send a gift card. That was the old Peter. The new Peter had standards. He ducked into the flagship department store on Pine Street, shaking rain off his coat. The air inside was warm and perfumed, a sensory overload of commerce and artificial luxury. He consulted his mental list. Sarah liked a specific brand of high-end skincare, something French and obscenely expensive. Peter navigated the aisles with the efficient stride of a man who maximized every second. He wasn't browsing. He was executing a transaction. He bypassed jewelry counters and aggressive cologne sprayers, heading toward the cosmetics section in the center of the floor. He spotted the brand's black and gold signage. There was a clerk behind the counter, her back turned, organizing a display of lip liners. "Excuse me," Peter said, his voice carrying the deep, resonant timbre of boardroom authority. "I need the restorative night cream set, the one in the holiday packaging, if you still have it." The clerk froze. Her shoulders, clad in the generic black uniform of the store, went rigid. Her hand, holding a tube of lipstick, hovered in midair. Peter checked his watch. "Miss?" She turned around slowly. The movement was heavy, reluctant, as if she were moving underwater. When she finally faced him, the fluorescent lights caught the heavy foundation on her skin, the frantic, wide-eyed shock in her eyes. Peter felt a momentary jolt, a physical thud in his chest, like missing a step on a staircase. It was Sylvia, but it wasn't the Sylvia of his memory. That woman had been sharp, glowing with arrogance and the sheen of expensive moisturizers. This woman looked tired. Her blonde hair was a shade too brassy, the roots showing. The lines around her mouth were etched deep with bitterness. She looked smaller, diminished, like a photograph left in the sun too long. For a heartbeat, the bustling noise of the department store, the chatter of shoppers, register beeps, pop music, fell away. Sylvia stared at him. She took in the custom-tailored suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. She saw the heavy Swiss watch on his wrist. She saw the lack of grease under his fingernails. She saw a man who radiated power, stability, and wealth. The very thing she had chased into the arms of a man who abandoned her. "Peter," she whispered, her voice cracked, dry and thin. Peter didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't look angry. He looked at her with the same critical, detached appraisal he used when auditing a failing warehouse. He saw the situation for exactly what it was. A reversal of fortune so absolute it felt biblical. "Sylvia," he said. His tone was polite, neutral. It was the voice he used for receptionists he didn't know. You look—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Her eyes devoured him, desperate to find a flaw, a loose thread, a sign of the warehouse worker she remembered. There was none. "I'm in town for business," Peter said, ignoring her stuttering. He placed his credit card on the glass counter. It was a heavy black metal card, the kind reserved for elite clients. The sound it made against the glass was a dull, authoritative thud. "The night cream set. Do you have it in stock?" Sylvia looked at the card, then back at his face.
Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. The humiliation radiated off her in waves. She was the server. He was the client. The dynamic she had enforced in their marriage, her as the prize, him as the servant, had been inverted. Yes, she stammered. She fumbled under the counter, her hands shaking visibly. She knocked over a small bottle of sample toner, which clattered loudly. I think we have one left. Take your time, Peter said calmly, though he checked his watch again. He stood there waiting. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't ask why she was working here instead of selling luxury cars. He simply waited for his purchase, watching her struggle to open the register with trembling fingers. The ghost had returned, and he was more real than she had ever been.
Sylvia's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get the ribbon to curl. She pulled at the gold spool, the plastic tearing with a sharp zip that sounded too loud in the sudden quiet between them. "You look good," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush, desperate to fill the silence. She didn't look up from the box she was wrapping. "Expensive. Different." "It's been a long time," Peter said. He didn't lean against the counter. He stood with his weight evenly distributed, hands loosely clasped in front of him, watching her struggle with the tape. "A long time," Sylvia laughed, a brittle, jagged sound. She finally looked up, her eyes wet and rimmed with red. "You vanished, Peter. You didn't just leave, you ghosted me. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Peter watched a tear track through the heavy powder on her cheek. 5 years ago, that tear would have brought him to his knees. He would have apologized for things he hadn't done, promised to work harder, to be better. Now he just noted it would stain her collar. "I think the paperwork was clear," Peter said calmly. "The paperwork?" Sylvia dropped the box on the counter. The facade of customer service crumbled. "I lost the house, Peter. I lost my job, my reputation, my friends. They all whispered. I had to sell the Mercedes. I'm working here." She gestured wildly at the department store around her, as if it were a prison cell. "Does that make you happy, seeing me like this?" She was begging for a fight. She needed him to be the bitter ex-husband. She needed him to say, "Yes, you deserve it," so she could feel like a victim again. She needed his anger to prove she still had power over him. Peter looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the panic behind the rage. She wasn't angry that he left. She was angry that he'd done it without her permission. "I don't think about it, Sylvia," Peter said. The words hit her harder than a slap. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "You don't think about it?" she whispered. "No. My life is in Houston now. The past is just data I don't need anymore." "But I was your wife." Her voice rose, attracting the attention of a shopper at the perfume counter nearby. Sylvia lowered her voice to a hiss, leaning over the glass. "We had a life, and you just walked out because... Why? Because of Derek? Is that it? You were jealous?" She threw the name out like a grenade, waiting for the explosion. Peter didn't blink. "I left because I had more respect for myself than you did." "I made a mistake," Sylvia cried, tears now flowing freely. "Derek was... he was a mistake. He left me, Peter. He used me. I was alone. I had nobody." She reached across the counter, her hand hovering over his sleeve, trying to bridge the gap, trying to find the man who used to fix her problems. "I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear? I'm sorry." Peter looked at her hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't move toward it either. He simply remained still, an immovable object. "I don't need an apology, Sylvia. I don't need anything." He reached for the card reader, tapped his black metal card, and waited for the beep. Approved. "Please," she whispered, her pride completely dissolving into desperation. Let's get coffee. My shift ends in 10 minutes. We can talk. I can explain." Peter picked up the bag containing the gift for his sister. He looked at Sylvia one last time. He saw the tragedy of her. A woman who defined herself by how others saw her, now begging to be seen by the only man she had deemed invisible. "I have a dinner reservation," Peter said,
and I don't drink coffee anymore." He turned around. "Peter," she called out, her voice cracking, "you can't just walk away again." But he was already moving, his stride long and purposeful, merging into the stream of shoppers. He didn't look back. He didn't slow down. He left her standing behind the glass counter, holding a roll of ribbon, surrounded by expensive things she couldn't afford, trapped in a cage of her own making.
The restaurant was the kind of place that required reservations weeks in advance. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay, where ferries glided through dark water like ghosts. The maitre d' led Peter to a private table where Marcus Chen, CEO of Pacific Retail Group, was already seated. "Peter," Marcus stood, extending his hand. "Right on time. I appreciate punctuality." "It's a sign of respect," Peter said, settling into his chair. The leather was soft, expensive, a world away from the hard plastic chairs at the Amazon break room. They ordered, Marcus choosing the salmon, Peter the steak, and fell into easy conversation about supply chain logistics, market inefficiencies, personnel redundancies. Peter's mind was sharp, focused, offering solutions with surgical precision. But underneath, something churned. He'd told Sylvia the truth. He didn't think about her anymore. The past 5 years had been a relentless march forward, each day building distance from the man who slept on floors and apologized for existing. Yet seeing her behind that counter, diminished and desperate, hadn't brought the satisfaction he'd expected. He'd imagined this moment differently during those first angry months in Houston. He'd fantasized about running into her, about her seeing what she'd lost. In those fantasies, he felt triumphant. The reality was emptier. "You seem distracted," Marcus observed, swirling his wine. "Everything all right?" Peter realized he'd been staring at the rain streaking down the window. "Just thinking about the audit," Peter lied smoothly. "There's going to be significant resistance to the personnel cuts. People get comfortable. They forget that comfort is a luxury failing companies can't afford. That's why I hired you. You're not afraid to make hard decisions." Peter took a sip of water. Hard decisions. That's what leaving had been, the hardest decision of his life. Walking away from 5 years, from the version of himself that believed love was enough. "I ran into someone today, from my past, someone I thought I'd left behind completely." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And?" "And I realized that revenge isn't as satisfying as indifference." "Sounds like wisdom, though I'm curious, did they realize what they lost?" Peter thought about Sylvia's trembling hands, her desperate plea for coffee, the way she'd looked at his chute like it was a verdict on her choices. "Yes," Peter said quietly. "I think they did." "Then that's enough, isn't it?" Marcus cut into his salmon. "The best revenge is living well. You're proof of that." The waiter brought their entrees. Peter cut into the steak, perfectly cooked, butter soft. 5 years ago, a meal like this would have been a month's splurge. Now it was Tuesday. He'd won. He knew that objectively. So why did the victory taste like ash? Through the window, the Seattle skyline glittered against the rain. Somewhere out there, Sylvia was probably closing up the perfume counter, her feet aching, her pride shattered. Peter ate his steak and discussed quarterly projections. The ghost had returned to haunt the living. But ghosts, he was learning, couldn't feel warmth.
The hotel room was exactly what Peter expected. Neutral tones, corporate minimalism, a king bed that felt too large for one person. He loosened his tie and stood by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked city he used to call home. His phone buzzed. A text from Harrison. "How'd the dinner go?" Peter typed back. "Well, Chen's on board. I'll have the preliminary audit ready by Thursday." He set the phone down and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the minibar, 18-year-old Macallan. He'd acquired a taste for good whiskey in Houston, along with tailored suits and the ability to fire people without flinching. He should have felt satisfied. The day had been a perfect demonstration of how far he'd climbed. Marcus Chen respected him. The acquisition team deferred to his expertise. And Sylvia had seen exactly what she'd thrown away. The warehouse worker had become the auditor. The invisible man had become undeniable. So why did he feel hollow? Peter sat on the edge of the bed, the scotch untouched in his hand.
The encounter with Sylvia had cracked something open inside him. Not grief, not anger, but a deeper question he'd been avoiding for 5 years. Had he actually healed? Or had he just built a more expensive cage? He thought about his life in Houston, the 70-hour work weeks, the apartment that looked like a hotel room because he was never there, the dates that went nowhere because he couldn't let anyone pass the surface, the promotions he chased like they were proof of something. He told himself he was building a new life, but what if he was just running a more sophisticated version of the same program, proving his worth to people who would never see him? His phone buzzed again, this time an unknown Seattle number. Peter stared at it. He knew, with cold certainty, who it was. He should delete it, block the number, maintain the boundary he'd established at that perfume counter. Instead, he opened the message. I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to say this. I was cruel to you. I took you for granted. I destroyed something real because I thought I deserved better. I was wrong. You were always better. I'm sorry, Peter. I'm so sorry. Peter read it 3 times. He looked for manipulation, for the hooks she used to use, but the message was simple, naked, the apology of someone with nothing left to lose. 5 years ago, he would have responded immediately. He would have comforted her, accepted the apology, maybe even offered to help. Now his finger hovered over the keyboard. He thought about what he'd tell a client. Don't make decisions based on emotion. Analyze the data. What does engagement cost versus benefit? But Sylvia wasn't a logistics problem. She was the person who'd taught him that love without respect was just slow-motion self-destruction. Peter set the phone down without responding. He walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Below, the city moved, cars streaming through wet streets, people hurrying under umbrellas, lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to predict. He'd spent 5 years believing that success was the answer, that becoming someone she'd regret losing would somehow validate the pain she'd caused. But standing here now, expensive scotch warming in his hand, wearing a suit that cost more than their old mortgage payment, he felt no different than the man who'd packed a duffel bag at dawn. The metrics had changed, the location had changed, the tax bracket had changed, but the fundamental loneliness, the sense of performing a role rather than living a life, that hadn't changed at all. Maybe revenge wasn't indifference. Maybe it was realizing that the person you'd been trying to prove wrong no longer mattered enough to prove anything to. Peter picked up his phone one more time. He didn't respond to Sylvia's message. Instead, he scrolled to his sister's contact and typed, I'm in Seattle for work. Can we have breakfast tomorrow? I miss you. The response came almost immediately. Yes. 8 a.m., the usual place? Perfect. Peter set the phone down and finally took a sip of the scotch. It burned pleasantly, warming the cold that had settled in his chest. Tomorrow, he'd have breakfast with someone who'd loved him when he had nothing to offer but himself. Tomorrow, he'd start figuring out what healing actually looked like. Tonight, he'd let the ghost rest.
The cafe was tucked into a side street in Fremont, the kind of place that served oversized lattes and had mismatched furniture that somehow worked. Peter arrived 10 minutes early, old habits dying hard, and claimed a corner table near the window. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the city washed clean and glistening. He watched people pass by, joggers, dog walkers, a man playing guitar for spare change, and felt something unfamiliar. Not quite peace, but a loosening of the tension he'd carried for so long. Peter! He turned to see Sarah rushing through the door, her face lit with a smile that reminded him why he'd survived. She wore jeans and a rain jacket, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking exactly like herself. No performance, no pretense. She threw her arms around him before he could stand, squeezing tight enough to make his ribs protest. Look at you, she said, pulling back to study his face. Houston's been good to you, or is it just the fancy suit? Maybe both, Peter admitted, gesturing for her to sit. They ordered, Sarah her usual caramel macchiato, Peter a black coffee, and fell into the easy rhythm of siblings who'd been through fire together. She talked about her kids,
her husband Tom's new job, the chaos of suburban life. Peter found himself genuinely laughing, the sound foreign in his own ears. "Okay," Sarah said finally, setting down her cup. "You didn't ask me to breakfast to hear about soccer practice. What's going on?" Peter had forgotten how well she could read him. During the divorce, when he'd called her from that first sterile apartment in Houston, she'd been the only one who didn't ask questions. She'd just listened while he fell apart, then helped him put the pieces back together. "I saw Sylvia yesterday." Sarah's expression hardened. "Did she see you?" "Yeah, she's working at a department store, perfume counter." He paused, studying his coffee. "She looked broken." "Good," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "After what she did to you?" "That's the thing," Peter interrupted. "It should feel good. I spent 2 years imagining that moment, but when it happened, I just felt empty." Sarah leaned back, considering him carefully. "You thought revenge would fix what she broke, didn't it?" Peter gestured at himself, the suit, the watch, the confidence. "I'm not that guy anymore. The one who slept 4 hours a night and apologized for breathing. I won." "Did you?" Sarah asked softly. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look successful, but you don't look happy." The words hit harder than he expected. Peter opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. When was the last time he'd felt genuinely happy? Not satisfied with a closed deal or validated by a promotion, but actually happy. "She texted me last night, an apology, said she was wrong about everything. And I didn't respond. What would I even say?" Sarah reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Peter, I love you. You're my little brother, and I watched what she did to you, how she made you feel worthless, how she bled you dry while screwing around with that asshole." She squeezed his hand. "But here's the truth. You didn't leave to get better. You left to get even. And 5 years later, you're still running. Different city, different job, but the same pattern. You're still trying to prove something to someone who doesn't deserve your energy." Peter felt his throat tighten. "So what do I do?" "You figure out who Peter is when he's not running from Sylvia or proving her wrong. You figure out what you actually want, not what looks good on paper." She smiled sadly. "Because I've seen your apartment in Houston, remember? It's beautiful and empty, just like that townhouse was." "That's not fair." "It's completely fair. You traded one prison for another. Hers had marble countertops. Yours has a corner office, but you're still not free." The words settled between them like stones. Peter looked out the window, watching a woman help her daughter puddle jump, both of them laughing. "I don't know how to be free," he said quietly. "I don't know what that looks like." "That's okay. That's actually the first honest thing I've heard you from 5 years. Not knowing is a start." Peter met her eyes. "She destroyed me, Sarah. She looked at me like I was nothing." "I know, and she was wrong. But Peter," Sarah's voice cracked slightly, "you're still letting her be right. Every 70-hour work week, every time you chase another promotion, every empty apartment you don't make into a home, you're still agreeing with her that you're only worth what you produce." A tear rolled down Peter's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I know, honey, I know." They sat in silence, hands clasped across the table, while the cafe bustled around them. Peter felt something breaking inside, not shattering, but cracking open, like ice melting after a long winter. "Stay for a few days," Sarah said. "Tom and the kids would love to see you. Have a normal dinner, play with your nephew. Remember what life feels like when you're not performing." Peter nodded, not trusting his voice. For 5 years, he'd been winning a war. Maybe it was time to find peace instead.
3 days later, Peter stood in the parking lot of the department store, rain pattering against his umbrella. He'd spent those days with Sarah's family, playing video games with his nephew, helping his niece with math homework, eating dinners that lasted hours because no one was rushing to be somewhere else. He'd remembered what it felt like to just exist. Now, briefcase in one hand, he stared at the illuminated entrance. His flight back to Houston left in 4 hours. The audit report was complete, sitting in his laptop bag. Marcus Chen was pleased. Harrison had already called about the next assignment.
Denver, another failing company that needed his surgical precision. The trajectory was clear. Keep climbing, keep winning, keep proving. But Sarah's words echoed. You're still not free. Peter closed the umbrella and walked inside. The store was quiet on a Wednesday afternoon. He found the perfume counter easily. Sylvia was there, helping an elderly woman choose a gift. She laughed at something the customer said. A real laugh, not the practiced charm she used to wield like a weapon. When the woman walked away, Sylvia turned and froze. Peter. I got your message, he said. She looked different in the daylight, less desperate than she'd seemed 3 days ago. Still tired, still diminished from the woman who used to sell Porsches, but there was something softer in her face, something honest. I'm sorry, she said again. Not because I want you back, not because I think I deserve forgiveness, just because it's true. I was cruel. I was shallow. I destroyed something real because I couldn't see its value. Peter nodded slowly. I know. Do you hate me? The question hung between them. Peter thought about it, really thought about it. Did he hate her? No, he said finally. I don't hate you, Sylvia. I don't think about you enough to hate you, and that's the truth. She flinched but nodded. That's fair. But I don't forgive you either, Peter continued. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because I don't need to. Forgiveness implies you still have power over my peace. You don't. Sylvia's eyes filled with tears. Then why are you here? Peter picked up his briefcase. Because I needed to see you one more time, not as the villain in my story, but as a person who made terrible choices and has to live with them, just like I have to with mine. What choices? Peter asked, confused. You didn't do anything wrong. I stayed too long. I accepted scraps and called it love. I let you make me invisible because part of me believed I deserved it. That was my choice, my mistake. He paused, feeling the weight of the words. But I'm making a different choice now. What choice? Peter looked at his watch, the expensive Swiss timepiece that had become another badge he wore. He unclasped it, felt its weight in his palm. I don't need this anymore. Sell it, keep the money, or throw it away. I don't care. Sylvia stared at the watch, then at him. Peter, I can't. It's not a gift, Peter interrupted. It's me letting go. Of the anger, of the need to win, of the idea that success is the same as healing. Peter picked up his briefcase and turned to leave. Peter, Sylvia called out, what are you going to do? Peter stopped, considering. Through the store windows, he could see the gray Seattle sky, the rain starting again, the city that once felt like a prison. I'm going to call my boss and quit. I'm going to find an apartment here near my sister. I'm going to take a job that ends at 5 o'clock. I'm going to learn how to be a person instead of a resume. That's a big change. Yeah, Peter smiled, a real smile, untainted by bitterness. But I'm good at logistics. I can figure it out. He walked towards the exit, his steps lighter than they had been in years. Behind him, Sylvia called out one more time. Peter, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Peter didn't turn around, but he raised his hand in acknowledgement. Outside, the rain had turned gentle, almost welcoming. Peter stood under the awning and pulled out his phone. He looked at Harrison's number, then at the airline app showing his Houston flight. The old Peter, the ghost, would have gotten on that plane, would have kept running, kept winning, kept proving. But this Peter, the real one, still being discovered, had different plans. He dialed Sarah's number instead. Hey, he said when she answered. Do you know any good landlords? I'm thinking about sticking around for a while. Sarah's delighted laugh filled his ear. Really? Really. I'm tired of being a ghost. Time to figure out how to be alive. He hung up and started walking, letting the rain touch his face. Somewhere in this city was an apartment that would become a home, a job that wouldn't consume him. Maybe, eventually, someone to share dinners with who saw him, really saw him. The war was over. Not because he'd won or lost, but because he'd finally stopped fighting. Peter Penn disappeared into the crowd, the expensive suit just clothes, the briefcase just a bag.
He was no longer the warehouse worker or the auditor or the ghost. He was just a man learning to be free. And that, finally, was enough.